Hi, my name is Ellie Gettinger. I'm the Education Director at Jewish Museum Milwaukee, and I'm joined today by Kristen Scheuing from the War Memorial Center. She's their education manager, and she is dealing with all sorts of different stories and collections that they have around veterans and their experiences from Milwaukee. And today we are exploring Pearl Harbor on its 80th anniversary. So, Kristen, tell us about what you have at the War Memorial Center to reflect this important anniversary.
Mm-hmm. So we do have several items in our collection that we use for an annual Pearl Harbor Day tour that we do. So this year, as you mentioned, is the 80th anniversary, so it's, pretty special. One of the items on this tour is this original World War II war poster. It references all of the major naval battles of World War II, including starting with Pearl Harbor. And when we were researching this, you can see that it's not signed. So we were trying to figure out who the artist was at the time. The war posters are interesting because they were created by the leading artists of the day. They were working with major advertising agencies in New York City. So some of them went on to be quite famous, and including this artist. Not a lot of people recognize this artist. It's a little bit different from his scenes of Boy Scouts and American families sitting around the tables.
Is this Norman Rockwell?
Yes, this is a Norman Rockwell.
Wow.
Yeah, so a little bit different theme, but
same
really
realism, same you're getting that same sense of personality through his picture.
Yeah, exactly. So most of what we do at the War Memorial Center is we're trying to help visitors understand the service experience. So when we do this Pearl Harbor tour, we're really trying to show our visitors the stories. So we look for stories of actual Milwaukee service members who have served. So today I'm going to talk about one story in particular. We uncovered this story through our honor roll project. We have a memorial in our courtyard that has 3,481 names of Milwaukee County residents who have died during their service since World War II. So we have a major project going on researching all of those names, trying to find photos and documents, letters connected to them. We've been fortunate to connect with a lot of families to get that information. And so far, we're probably about 75% through the project, and we have so far uncovered about 25 local sailors and Marines who were killed at Pearl Harbor that day.
Wow. I mean, because it seems like that's so early, these are people who are already enlisted. This is pre-World War II. It's World War II has started, but it's pre-American entrance into World War II. So these are people who were enlisted and already stationed in Hawaii in 1941.
That's a good point. Many more enlisted on December 8th, 1941, because there really was this giant call to answer this attack. I want to talk about, before I get into our main story, a couple of stories of local Milwaukee heroes. Not many people know about this, and these men are both connected to our honor roll. These are ship captains who were serving at Pearl Harbor that day. They both grew up in Milwaukee. They both attended Milwaukee high schools. They both received appointments to attend the U.S. Naval Academy at Annapolis. And they both received the Medal of Honor for their service at Pearl Harbor. The gentleman on the left, quite famous, Franklin Van Valkenburg, was the captain of the USS Arizona, suffered the greatest loss of life that day. The man on the right is Cassin Young, captain of the USS Vestal. He did survive that day. He was able to right his ship and get it to the shore, saving hundreds of sailors and Marines on his ship. Unfortunately, he was killed the following year in Guadalcanal. Mm. So, this is a pretty big connection that Milwaukee has to that day. But there were many more lower level people who were serving that day. And one of those that I want to talk about is Seaman Second Class Arthur Finnis. Now, this is just really, they are all tragic stories on our honor roll, but this is just one that has really stood out to us, in part because he was so young. He was 16 years old, and for his 17th birthday, he had asked his parents if he could enlist in the Navy. They consented to that request. They went down with him to sign for him at the recruiting center. And he later said that that was the greatest birthday present that he received. So he turned 17 in January 1941. By the end of the year, December, he was on board the USS Oklahoma at Pearl Harbor. Now, and you try to imagine like in the aftermath of Pearl Harbor. So they're only about 4 hours ahead of us in Milwaukee. So sorry, behind us. So at 8 a.m. Pearl Harbor time was noon Milwaukee time.
Mhm.
And with the reports that were coming out, it was just a lot of chaos. There was a lot of chaos in Hawaii. There was a lot of chaos across the country, trying to get information and trying to figure out exactly what had happened. Initially, this was called a raid, not even an attack. It was just, some Japanese planes had done something at Pearl Harbor. They weren't quite sure. They were getting confirmations of deaths. So they were reporting initially a couple hundred deaths total. And we know that, that far exceeded 1,000 deaths later. Actually, 2,400 people were killed at Pearl Harbor that day. But imagine what it was like. He was in the Navy. They probably knew, they did know what ship he was on, because just 2 weeks prior to this, I was going to say email, but he had cabled them to let them know that he was okay. And he gave them the name of the ship, the USS Oklahoma. So they knew that he was there, but many other families were not even sure which ships their children were on. They often changed ships, so they weren't even quite sure. So really it was a lot of waiting and trying to just wait until the government had this information. So this is an illustration of exactly what happened to the US Oklahoma. It listed and then it sunk. So it took 415 sailors and 14 Marines to the bottom there of the harbor. This was the second greatest loss of life after the USS Arizona.
Wow. Well, it's just so hard to imagine. These are massive, hundreds of feet long warships that
right.
What it takes to take something like this down is so incomprehensible.
Exactly. And so if you figure, most of the people serving on a ship are not on the deck when it gets hit. They're down below. So that access is really kind of, restricted, and they're not able to get out. So, what I was talking about before, so these families, these newspaper articles start coming out, and it's really just showing all of these families just searching the papers and trying to find their child and trying to find out the fate of their child. So for quite a while, so December 8th, both of the papers in town, the Sentinel and the Journal, are releasing multiple editions. So all day long, people are just gathered around the papers trying to find out what happened.
So they're basically listing here
then
people that
on
we
December
know are dead in the paper?
Yeah, so they would start listing. They weren't listing deaths until the following January, February. They start listing deaths. All they're listing is missing. So on December 22nd, 1941, Arthur's family receives word that he was indeed on that ship and that he is considered missing. December 26th, the paper puts out another photo of Arthur's mother in their apartment building. She had organized this Christmas party for the children there. It had already been planned. She went ahead with it. And really just kind of, it says right here that his family members are just still confident that he's missing and will be recovered later. So part of this party she planned for her son, because she just kept assuming that he would come home. And in fact, most of these families did, because they didn't get the official word of their death until years later.
Oh, wow.
So in fact, in February 1944, the family receives the Purple Heart. So the Purple Heart is awarded to those who were severely wounded or killed in combat in action. And then a year after that, the family receives the final telegram that actually the Department of War considers that their son has died. So that's 4 years later, 3.5 years later, that these families are waiting for this official word. And, many times it's still not real for them because they have received nothing. So in the case of most of those who were killed at Pearl Harbor, there were no remains, there were no funerals. So all of that was kind of put on hold. So there's this government organization called the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency, and it is their job to to first find and then identify remains of American service members who were killed outside of the continental United States. So in 2015, this agency collected hundreds of remains from, well, actually about almost 400 remains from the USS Oklahoma. So they have divers that go down, they're collecting the remains. They try to separate them out as they can based on how they're found. And then over the past 5 years, they've been working, trying to identify families. So they're doing a lot of genealogy work, and through DNA testing are able to start identifying these people.
It's amazing. I mean, it's stuff that, you know, this didn't help his parents, but did he have siblings and
he did have siblings. He had a sister and a brother, I believe. His sister died in 2000. She was the last one of his immediate family. He doesn't have any relatives still living in Milwaukee, but there are nieces and nephews that have moved away mostly to Illinois. So those are the ones that were contacted for the DNA samplings. So they were able to identify the remains of Arthur Finnis, and in August 2021, the agency announced that his remains had been returned to Milwaukee. And then this is a photo of the burial of Arthur Finnis from Wood National Cemetery in Milwaukee on October 15th, 2021. You know, I was quite taken aback by how emotional this event was, you know, for someone who had died so long ago. But, you know, really, if you just start thinking about it, took 80 years for this to happen. And his, you know, his parents having died, his whole family, just like his community, what a loss for the community, and not being able to have this, you know, this sense of completion for this really young man who went, you know, to fulfill his life's dream to serve there. So, you know, these are the kind of stories that we are looking to tell through our honor roll project. You know, like this story, there are hundreds of others, just like I said, tragic stories that are connected to that day. But it's really important because I really do believe that it's just not a loss for the family and for that person. You know, they say that a service member never serves alone. He has a whole family, a whole community behind him. So it's important for us to remember these sacrifices.
Well, and it's also just so interesting how this research continues, how you at the War Memorial Center are doing this research to help connect Milwaukee stories, and how the national, you know, the government is actually trying to make sure that we're giving people like Arthur Finnis, you know, the recognition they deserve and the burial they deserve, so that they're not just, which I think is amazing. So on this Pearl Harbor, as we're wrapping up, is there anything you think, you know, 80 years later that we should do to recall this day, to remember people like Arthur Finnis in their service? Is there anything that you feel like is the best way to kind of think about this, a day that shall live in infamy, in FDR's words?
Right. So, you know, the War Memorial Center hosts an annual ceremony on December 7th, Pearl Harbor Remembrance Day. And even when I started attending that ceremony 5 or 6 years ago, there were still survivors who were attending that ceremony. And, you know, each day we lose so many World War II survivors. And it's, you know, I'm afraid that when the survivors are gone and the World War II veterans are gone, I hope that we will still be carrying on these traditions of honoring, because, you know, that event happened 80 years ago, and most of us are not connected to that, you know, in our lifetimes, but it is something that has affected history. So if anything, it's, you know, the history that we need to remember, you know, and just, I mean, you know, going to Wood National Cemetery, when you see row after row of these graves, and, you know, we have to make sure that they're not forgotten. So one thing that we think of when we do our honor roll project is that there's this saying that the service member who has lost his life, he remains dead, but he is not fully dead when people still say that person's name. So, you know, through this honor roll project, researching them and spending so much time digging into someone's personal story, I feel like many times bringing them back to life, and they are telling us their stories. And so many of these stories you can read online on our website at warmemorial.org, and you can go to Honor Roll and you can search by conflict or even high school or place of business and find out more about these people.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. That idea of maintaining the kind of memory of a person is actually an incredibly Jewish idea. It's something we do each year on the anniversary of a loved one's death. We say the blessing, the mourner's Kaddish, the kind of sanctification of their name and who they are. And I think it's lovely that that's a piece of what your mission is too, is just to keep that memory alive. Thank you so much for joining me today, Kristen. We really appreciate it. And we love partnering with the War Memorial Center. Please check out their website for more information. You can see the email, the address is right there on our slide, right there, warmemorialcenter.org. Again, I'm Ellie, and this has been a museum moment. I want to thank our supporter, Robin Cohen, for making this possible. Please come check out the War Memorial Center or Jewish Museum Milwaukee. We're open. We want to see visitors, and we hope that you have a great day and you use history wisely.